Hi, welcome to the Oliver Fetter YouTube channel. Today, I'm continuing my 1.9 liter ALH VW engine turbo diesel build. Currently, I got the crankshaft in and all that kind of things checked. The block itself has been inspected and checked and honed. And so now we're on to the next step of kind of completing the engine block here, which is taking these nice rods and putting them with these nice pistons. Now, if you've watched other videos, you'll recall I've actually done 2 of these before, and it turns out that these piston cutouts are actually asymmetrical on each side of the engine. Well, they are symmetrical, but they're different. So on 2 of the cylinders, they look this way, and on 2 of the cylinders, they're the other way. And I bought 4 of the same piston the first time, so we didn't get very far. So now we're back. We got 2 of the correct pistons remaining, and so we're gonna go ahead and install these on the rods and put all the rods and pistons in the motor and just make sure everything's good there. Then we're also going to check piston protrusion, because you can't actually order the correct head gasket till you check how far the pistons come out of the block. So we're pretty much just installing pistons on rods, installing rod and pistons in the engine, and then checking piston protrusion to see what head gasket I need to order. Aside from that, I was going to reuse the original oil pump that came off this motor, and after all the work I've put into rebuilding this motor, I came to the conclusion that that's an absolutely absurd idea. Even though it checked out fine, I just would rather feel better using brand new stuff when I'm putting so much time and energy into building this motor to begin with. So we're not going to button up the oil pan yet today, but I am moving all my shop belongings over to Crested Butte here pretty soon. And so one of the big things right now that's a mess is actually this engine. So I now have a very direct motivation to finish assembling this thing, because currently its parts are literally everywhere. So in the next month or so, I plan to have this thing fully together, head gasket, oil pan on, all the covers on, so I can put it in my car and take it somewhere and not have it be a huge mess. Nice. So without further ado, I'm going to get these pistons on these rods and we'll get rolling. So these are the 2 rods I have already assembled, and so the way the arrows are pointing this way is the front of the motor, and I just want to illustrate my point about things being asymmetrical. If I point this one also towards the front of the motor, again, front is this way, you can see these cutouts are opposite, which is why I had to get 2 different ones. And then the other thing, just because I'm a tweaker, the Max Speeding Rods logo I am putting facing away from the front of the engine, and I forgot why I'm doing that, honestly. Actually pulling my rods off for some reason, which I hope never to have to, the numbers that show which caps go with which rods will be at the back of the motor, which is where your head will probably be when you're looking at taking the rods off. Honestly, you probably don't need to reason through that like I just did. It should be irrelevant. You could put the rods on in any which way, but that would be aggravating to my OCD. So, it's also been a while since I have touched any of this stuff, which means, unfortunately, it had lots of time to collect dust and dirt. So when we go to install these parts in my new engine over there, the cylinder walls and also the crankshaft are all going to need a thorough cleaning again, even though like pretty much nothing has happened. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean the wrist pin journals again. And now the way I want this one is such that if this is facing the front of the motor, the rod's facing that way. So it's going to go together like this. And all I got to do is get some of this on everything. All right, so now we're actually ready to assemble this. Again, if the front is that way, then I'm making it so the numbers on the rod face me. I set this up the wrong way, but there we go. Okay. And here you just take your time. It's all precision as shit, so it should line up. Very nice. And you want to take your time putting these in because these can scratch your piston skirts. It's kind of a terrible design, honestly. But I would highly recommend you take your time. And I think last time I did this, I used the sharp end of a pick. I wouldn't use the sharp end of a pick. Use something rounded so you don't scratch your skirts. It would be stupid to scratch the piston skirts right off the bat. Rods and pistons are fully assembled, all four. They all seem good. The rod end to wrist pin all feels good. Gravy. So now it's time to put those things in her, and a couple things to be mindful of. To start with, it's got to be really, 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 really clean. No dust, no dirt, nothing. Then we got to make sure we put the correct pistons in the correct places. So to do that, again, there's the symmetry where two pistons are different than the other two. And we're going to check with the head, which is the most perfect way to check because the valves are actually what are different sizes on different sides. And that's what we need to be checking for. So we'll look at the bottom of the head when we're installing these pistons, and that'll keep us from installing them the wrong way, which would lead to basically immediate engine failure if you turned it on. And this is a very clean microfiber. I'm going to start by cleaning the walls and the crankshaft. They're not bores, what are they? Journals, geez. I'm going to clean the rod journals and the... That hand's too big. This hand's just the right size somehow. Start by cleaning all that crap really well so that we don't end up with any contamination that causes premature engine failure. And once I'm confident everything's clean, we're then going to oil everything up. We'll get the ring compressor out and we'll go to town installing these. Now the best way, generally speaking, to install is to one at a time put them in. You can do two at a time too, because 1 and 4 fire together and 2 and 3 fire together. So you can put the 2 in that fire together and put their caps on and snug them, and then you can rotate the crankshaft 180 degrees and put the other 2 in and put their caps on and snug them. Or just do them one at a time, which is maybe what I'm going to do because that's a lot easier. Because what ends up happening is you rotate the crankshaft all the way up so that the journal is at the top, at kind of top dead center for that cylinder. And then you put the rod in there, but then you really can't put the cap on very well because it's all the way as far away as possible as it could be from you as the assembler. Got to get on this side. Too much. So at any rate, doing them one at a time is probably what's going to happen. And this engine isn't perfect. Honestly, I don't know why I'm tweaking so hard. But it just seems like a new oil pump wouldn't be a bad call, It is the thing that puts in work. Mainly because I don't really think the pump is bad, but I feel like the way, at least the chain and tensioner, I should definitely replace. Here I am cleaning the journals. This is just removing any dust that may have gotten on them since I installed the crank. If there's dirt on these journals now, and you fire up your new engine and it's not just dust, like a piece of lint is one thing, but like a grain of sand is another. if there's dirt, like a grain of sand, on your journals, when you go to fire up your engine that you didn't clean off at this step, then it's going to immediately gouge your rod bearing on its very first powered revolution through your motor, and probably then some, because it'll take it a while to work out of there. So it's definitely worth taking a few seconds to clean it. Also, look how nice and buttery that is. Clean, 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 clean. And I kind of wish I've been storing this in a plastic bag. I've been a little bit lax on my engine storage. It's just been upside down in a corner with a t-shirt over the top. And that's pretty good, but dust can still float up from the underside and get places you don't want it to. So if you were ever like partway through an engine build and then wanting to stop, I'd highly recommend you like fully encapsulate this in plastic and tape and wrap and seal the crap out of it. Cool. So we're all clean. I'm going to put the lube. I'm just going to do both. You can't use too much assembly lube. I don't think you can, at least. So I'm going to go ahead and put some on now so that the crank has some, but then I'm also going to put it on the rod bearings when I go to install them. This is exciting. I haven't worked on this in a minute. I was kind of dreading it, but now I'm stoked. When this thing goes in, it's going to be super cool. And just as a passing statement, I plan to dyno the 1.6 in the Rabbit with the current configuration, because I'm pretty convinced it's the best configuration I've had so far. So I'm planning to dyno that probably in January, and then I'm going to take everything that's already on the 1.6 and put it on the 1.9, and without any other huge modifications, I'm planning to then dyno the 1.9 with the same things on it. So we'll get to see how much power difference there is just from displacement gains. 1.6 to 1.9. Otherwise, everything else would be the same. So we got our crankshaft clean and lubed. We don't have any lube on the cylinder walls yet, but we're gonna get there. So in here is 40 weight engine oil, or 15W40. It's probably just conventional oil. But for the sake of lubing up the cylinder walls, I'm going to use regular old motor oil because it'll spread better. The assembly lube doesn't really spread very well. And I'm probably going to go ahead and do the skirts. And you do want to put some oil on the rings, but the point isn't to have your rings stay oily, because that's not how rings work. So I'll probably put assembly lube on the piston and motor oil in here. And then all you need to install pistons is one of these. I keep mine in a plastic bag, which I would recommend you do, because this is not something that's supposed to be dirty ever, or it's a pain to clean, so it'd be stupid to let it get dirty. This is a piston ring compressor. This goes in here, it twists. When you loosen it, it gets bigger. And this one, they're pretty versatile, like that's big. You could do quite a few different sizes of pistons. And this thing itself gets oil on it because for one, you're sliding the piston through it, and for another, it slides on itself. So it's a good thought, even though I had it in a plastic bag, and it's been in a plastic bag since last time I assembled a motor. I'm just gonna wipe it off real quick to continue our cleanliness binge. Okay, I had to move the camera because the camera was in the way. So, we're gonna start on, ow, it's hard to turn by that, cylinder number 1, and too many things. I'm gonna go ahead and oil up the cylinder walls, and I'm just gonna do that kind of in sloppy fashion. Feels wrong. And I'm gonna go ahead and do this to all of them real quick. Nice. And a little bit of oil around, you know, the seats here doesn't really hurt either for what we're doing. We just need to do a quick sanity check on which piston goes where. I'm gonna grab the head here in 1 second. Out of the way. Okay, I'm gonna do this backwards so you watching have an easy time conceptualizing. So the head goes on this way, right? Just like that. And you can see it goes small, big valve, then big valve, small valve, big valve, small valve. So doesn't matter which one of those we pick up so long as it has a small valve at the front of the motor on these two and a small valve on the back of the motor for those two. So small to front of motor for the first two is all we really have to remember, which means when you're putting pistons in, it doesn't matter which way the text reads. What matters is which way the arrow points, which confusingly enough is actually upside down from the text. Here, let me see. Kind of doubt the camera will do this, but there's the arrow. So this one has the small relief on this side. So our first two will have small reliefs right here. Clean any last dust that may have accumulated on your pistons off. This is your last chance. And then one word on ring setup too. Let me get close. So piston rings, unless you buy gapless piston rings, which I wanted to for this project, but dollars, all have gaps. You can see them right here. Now, if you installed these, as you install them, they do pinch down and that gap gets way smaller, but you don't want these gaps to line up because even if you installed it like this and they all crush down, you can see there's a clean gap here for the combustion gases to get through. So what you want to do is kind of set them up in like a triangle or like a trinity shape. So, you know, this gap goes over there, this gap goes over here, and this gap would go all the way around so that the gaps are, you know, like here, there, and there. So they're as offset as possible, which leads to minimum combustion gases getting out and into your oil as blow by. So very important that you clock your rings correctly and take the time to do that. So, and they're kind of sloppy and it's a little bit hard to do, so be patient. Set them where you want them and then put the compressor on it and snug them down. And I want my skirts. The rings themselves, you're not really trying to like drown in oil, but the skirts you certainly are. Because the skirt, and in this motor, I'm assembling it now. It's probably not gonna go in the car for another 2 months at least. And it probably won't actually be fired up for maybe 4 to 6 months, which is kind of the limit, I feel like, on how long you want to let an assembled engine sit. But that's why I'm using assembly lube here. And it's to keep these things from having a catastrophic failure right at the start. So now with some oil on it, these rings will actually kind of stay in place. So my oil ring is going to go on the front of the piston facing you. My second ring is going to go, if the oil ring's here, my second ring's there, and my top ring is going to be over here. So I'm actually lining up these ring gaps to these kind of pockets, and that's just per chance. It seems like it's working out well. Put this thingy on. Get our wrench And, you know, this is probably a nice place to have like a second set of hands helping you. But you don't need it. I've basically never had a second set of hands. And take your time here. This is exactly where you break a piston ring. And breaking a piston ring would be big sad at this point in your project. Because you're so close. And then you'd have to wait on parts. So now I'm going to cinch this. That might be it. You want to tighten it as much as you can because that's going to make this transition as easy as possible. And that's as tight as we can get it. And I am kind of skipping steps here. You got to take your cap off. It's all right though. You can skip steps, but you can't miss steps. Assembly lube on this for sure. And you want to avoid getting oil on the top of the piston, or you can just wipe it off once you're done. Oil on the top of the piston does you no good. There's a little piece of dirt. I think I got it. Okay. So, don't put it in backwards. Gently and carefully kind of get that going. Get it down in there. And then I have a wooden hammer, which I'm actually not going to use. This is usually what I use to install stuff, but when you use it, it tends to chip, especially because these have these pre-combustion chambers on them. So, I'm going to grab a rubber mallet. And what I'm going to do is just use the handle end of the rubber mallet to tap this in. So right now, it's still up in this sleeve. The piston skirt isn't even out yet. So we got to be careful. You don't want to wail on this only to find that your skirt is being damaged. So right now the skirt is just coming through. So get that a little more lined up. Now our skirt is actually in the bore. There we go. So as we come down here, it's going to be really easy at first to push this in, like no problem. And then you're going to get to a point where your rings are trying to make it into the cylinder too. And that's the whole reason this thing is really tight, is the tighter it is, the easier it is for those rings to slip right in. And you want everything to be kind of like flush and pressed on. But when you get to your rings, it's going to take a couple of slightly harder taps, like here are the rings. Can you hear how that changed? And in fact, we're probably hitting the crankshaft. So you need to be like multi-dimensional careful. Oh no, we're just all the way down. Friggin' gorgeous. So there you go. That's one. And now I'm gonna go ahead and wipe this shit off. The bottom of my hammer, not the cleanest thing. So this thing is all the way down in there. It's actually on the crankshaft journal right now, so you can see we're protruding a little bit. That's good. We have some piston protrusion. The rods aren't bent yet, folks. And I'm going to go ahead and probably like right there. You kind of want to get it to a point where you can push on the piston with your hand. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and push this thing to bottom dead center, which is going to let us get the cap on. So I got my cap, and once again, the important thing here is that your numbers line up. So on this side of the cap, if I put it on this way, there's no numbers on this side, which actually I kind of regret not putting the numbers on the front, but it's too late now, and I don't care. So it goes on correctly this way. And you can just get these started by hand. And we will need to put some ARP stud lube on the seats of these, since these are ARP fasteners. So assembly lube goes under the head of the fastener and kind of like on its shaft, but not on the threads. That's not the point. You're not trying to lubricate these to come out. You're just trying to lubricate them so that they go in nicely, and that as they seat, that's not causing excess friction and throwing off the torque measurement. Look at all this beautiful hardware. And again, we're going on the seat now. Very nice. Throw that in there. These are ARP 2000 fasteners, and they are 5/16. So based on that, the instructions say to torque these to 26 foot-pounds each. Now, if you're using OEM rods and bolts, those are torqued to yield, which are different. And generally that torque spec is probably more like 20 foot-pounds in a quarter turn or something like that. Okay. And now we could go right on to number 2, but I just want to make sure this turns okay. It looks like it does. Look at that. I'm going to go full bang around here just to make sure there's no binding, nothing silly going on. Okay, so now that was 1. We're fully in, we're fully installed, everything's lubed. Throw a little more on here for good luck between the seams. That rod is done, and now you just have to do that exact same process 3 more times, and the only thing that I need to not screw up 3 more times is which piston goes where. Whew. So all the pistons are in the guy. As a final check, I'm just gonna retorque everything one more time. I don't expect it to change, and each time I've put a piston in here, I've actually rotated it to make sure nothing's binding. Now with your first 2, you'll find you can rotate it by hand no problem, and by the time you get to the 3 and 4 in here as well, you're gonna need to add a wrench or put the bolt back in or something to give you enough leverage to turn it, just because there is still a lot of like oil, friction, stiction, bunch of things, but it should turn freely and feel kind of tight and smooth. There shouldn't be any play when you wiggle it back and forth. You just kind of want to sanity check yourself. And I'm going to stop right here because I want to recheck these 2. Still fine. And when you're putting the caps on, I didn't really touch on it, I just did it, but I don't put the bolts in and fully torque one and then torque the other. It'll go on wonky. Tighten them both evenly in small increments. You don't need a torque spec to do this. Just, hand tight on both. A little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. Make sure everything goes together even, Steven, really nice and clean. Just gotta check this guy one more time. Cool. Now I'm gonna go ahead and flip the motor over, and I want to clean the tops of my pistons and clean the deck because there's oil all over them, and that's not where the oil is supposed to be. The oil is supposed to be on this side. And once I've done that, then we can measure piston protrusion and figure out what head gasket I need. Probably want some brake clean, honestly. The assembly lube is really thick stuff, and it probably won't come off nicely till you give it some brake clean or something. And you don't want it on your deck either. I mean, a little bit is okay for the short term, but for the long term, you're putting a head gasket on this. So the point isn't to put a head gasket on top of a bunch of engine oil. You want to put your head gasket on a nice, dry, clean surface. So even though we did the heavy amount of deck cleaning earlier, you know, right now is like a secondary deck cleaning that's just real quick. And then when you actually go to put the head on the engine, you can do a tertiary head cleaning. And then by that time, this surface will be extremely clean and extremely ready to be assembled into a beautiful motor. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this thing. I'm using a crescent wrench on the crankshaft right now because it has a slot on it. Well, a slot's kind of the wrong word, but it has a flat spot. And not really sure that's what you want, but I don't think I'm rounding anything off with the amount of pressure I'm applying. And again, we're just getting it really nice and clean. Because the top of your pistons don't need oil deposits to start. If you cover them in assembly lube and turn your engine on, these freaking gorgeous, shiny surfaces will immediately turn black and be covered in sooty paste. So you don't want that, though. Probably within like one revolution of this engine, it's gonna look horrible and black in here anyways because it's diesel, but yeah, that's how she goes. Nice and clean. And remember when I opened this engine up, there was literally dead bugs inside the pistons. So I'm glad I kind of took steps to go a little above and beyond that. I'm also wiping the excess oil. I'm not using brake clean anymore. This is a different part of the rag. But I'm wiping the excess oil off where the rings. So, well, let me make a conclusive thought here. I lubed up everything when I put it in. Now, when you turn the engine over a few times, your rings are actually scraping the oil, like the extra oil you put on the walls, to the tops of the cylinders. And much like having it on the crown of the piston, if you leave it here, it will just burn, and you don't need oil to burn here. So wipe it off. But don't use brake clean. You still want some oil on your cylinder walls, especially because in my case, this engine is going to sit for a little while. Okay, so now it's time to measure piston protrusion. If you haven't noticed yet, you should probably just own one of these. I don't even remember where I got this from, but at any rate, it has a magnetic base, makes it magnetic, and this is just a dial indicator, so it's effectively a magnetic dial indicator on a stick. It's useful for like a whole slew of things, including differential rebuilding, engine rebuilding. I'm definitely using it to find top dead center. There's like 1,000,001 uses for a dial indicator on a stick. So today, let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and do this end cylinder. And the base isn't quite flat. Well, I mean, it is flat, but not completely. So you wanna make sure, or at least in my case, you wanna make sure that the base itself is nicely anchored on the deck. And once that magnet's on, it's pretty bomber. Wrong one. And so now we get this in kind of into position as best we can. It's fine if we go over a little bit, as in this doesn't have to perfectly touch the piston at top dead center. That'd be silly. What it does need to do is touch the piston in a good place. So we're working on that. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and get this engine rotated around. I want we're not gonna touch it yet. I thought we were. So you need to drop your dial indicator low enough that it actually gets good engagement. And I would recommend going as close to the center of the piston as you can, because that's really what we're after. So I'm going to go right here and then just move it closer to me so it's landing right on that flat spot. Okay, so I'm watching my dial indicator and rotating the engine, and when it stops moving, like right there, see how it pauses? Right. I'm going to take the screen for a minute. Right there is top dead center on cylinder number 4. And this is all irrelevant now. We're just setting this shit up. I'm going to zero it. And you can see this thing is sensitive. I'm just tapping it lightly. There we go. Everything's settled. So that's our 0 point, is the piston's top dead center. And then all I'm gonna do is twist this bad boy so that now we're on the deck, and we're gonna read how far off we are. 0 up here, and we just dropped to just shy of 60. So from 0 to 60 is 10, 20, 30, just shy of 40. So we're at 39 thousandths of an inch of piston protrusion on cylinder number 4. Right here, the specs, you can see a 1 notch is, well, you can just see what it is. There they are. So based on what I've measured so far, because I'm at pretty much 0.05 inches as my max, is I'm at a 2 notch right here. I'm gonna double check my remaining 2 pistons, because it would really suck to screw this one up. So right now the max I've seen is 0.048 inches. I'm gonna check these 2 to make sure they're not more than that, and if they're not, then I know I need a 2-notch gasket, because it falls in that range. If you get the wrong gasket, your pistons will hit your valves, because the gasket is what controls how close the head is to the pistons. As a side note, sometimes I think it's performance-y. You use a thicker gasket, lower your compression ratio slightly, and maybe reduce stress on your engine. But for the sake of this build, I'm going to be using the correct gasket at full compression ratio, because I'm kind of studying the crap out of everything anyways, so I'm not really worried too much about that at the moment. Okie dokie. So I checked these 2. They were both around 0.040, so 40 thou. And again, my max I measured anywhere was 48 thou. And a 2-notch head gasket is good for, drum roll, about 47 thou to 55 thou. So I'm pretty close / almost in the ballpark of using a 1-notch. But I'd rather be on the safe side of that anyways, so I'm going to use a 2-notch. And you could also interpret that as I actually am ever so slightly going to drop the compression in this thing, but I'm really not worried about it, because definitely the plan is to boost the living snot out of this engine. So I'm not too worried about losing a teeny bit of compression for the sake of having, you know, an extra 0.5 millimeter for my valves to clack around in. So 2-notch head gasket, pistons are installed, sanity check, big valves, small valves, which matches perfectly. And now it's pretty much time to resume assembling everything else. I'm going to cover this really well this time. I'm probably going to go get some saran wrap, because I just cleaned it again and I don't want it to get dirty. And it's like probably time to put the oil pump back on, put the oil pan back on, put the head on, all that good jazz. For the immediate future, my head studs I want to use in this are actually in this car. So I will likely just throw my old head studs in here as placeholders. And so I can just kind of like gently set everything together and like, I don't know if I want to like snug it up or order, head gaskets are expensive, so probably not. Probably just order the one head gasket, put it on with the wrong studs. Don't torque it, but just make it like a little past finger tight so nothing smashes around and everything stays sealed and nice. Ideally, I would put like all of the front pulleys on, you know, maybe even like I want to have the fuel pump plate on here with everything mounted. So when I go to move the engine, the accessories I'm using with it are with it. So we now have a honed, pistoned, measured, beautiful TDI base engine in the works here. And I will be continuing this build probably in the next couple weeks. Gotta go back to work, but then when I'm back from the holidays, I'll have time to hopefully button the rest of this thing up. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate ya. Have a nice day out there.